Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning today's 3 prakim Rambam, starting with Hilchos, Tumas Meis, final 2 chapters, Chav Daled, and then Chafei, and beginning Hilchos Para Aduma Perek Aleph. Now we are up to Tumas Meis Perek Chav Daled. We're gonna be introduced to a din of a wall. See, up until now, whenever we were speaking about the rooms and there's a wall that's separating them, indeed as it does, and Tumah in one room does not go into another room, the ending of this Tumas Meis will be what happens if there's going to be Tumah in the wall itself. And as we will see, there will be times that we're going to view Tumah in a wall as if it is in the room, and it's automatically going to be Matama, the closest room to the place of the Tumah that's within the wall. Obviously, in the scenario where the wall will not have a din of a kever sasum, as we'll speak out when we go through this chapter. Now, another nuance that we have been learning recently about the oil b'toich oil, right? One of the shloisha matzilin is an oil. When is a inner oil matzil? That which is underneath it. From tuma that's in the larger oil, right? Because we only say soif tuma lotzes, but we don't say tuma is going to come in. That's only kishe'ein datoi lefanoisai, when you're not planning to remove that inner oil. But whenever there is an inner oil that's going to be removed, it will not protect. And finally, coming back to the walls, just to get familiar with the words, that there is a certain type of wall that's called a wall that's serving the house. It's called a kaisel that's mishamish as habayis. Then there's going to be an opposite type of wall. There's going to be something called a bayis that's mishamish, a wall, as we'll explain, and all the nafkaminas ladina. Perek Chav Daled has 8 halachas. Let us begin with halacha Aleph. Says the Rambam, bayis shechalokoi bekankanim tohoris min haaretz varakoy. So if you have a house and you are now creating a barrier, a wall within the house, meaning a room, you're separating the room into 2 parts. How did you do it? By putting kankanim, by putting barrels. You made rows of barrels going all the way to the length, all the way to the ceiling. Now, now you have to in one of these 2 sides. So let's start like this. If the opening of these barrels that are klecheres are facing the side that does not have tumah in it, and as we said, klecheres is not acquiring tumah when the contact is to the outside of it. So the tumah is unable to be metame the barrels. So they are considered a proper barrier. These are the rules that we have been learning. If something itself is tamei, it cannot save, but the barrels are not tamei, so matzilas. But ve'im hoya klape hatuma, then they become tamei. Since they become tamei, eino matzilas. Now let's add a layer to that. The person makes a wall out of barrels, but on the barrels he smears it with mud. Mud does not become tamei. So now the question is whether he put the mud on the inside. The inside means in the side where it's tahor. Whether he put the mud in the outside, meaning on the side that where the tumah is, we have to see the following. If you were now to remove the barrels, would the mud still stand? So the mud is a wall by itself. So I don't need to rely on the barrels, facing the problem that if the barrels are tamei, indeed the barrels cannot be matzil. The mud is not becoming tamei. Matzil, the imlav, einoi matzil, meaning that we view the entire area as one oil and everything on both sides is tamei. Simple. Halacha beis. Now, next. If you have a house, it was divided with boards or with curtains. So if the division was, as we spoke out on the previous halacha, minatzadodim means, think about your room and you put up a wall in the middle and you create 2 sides. Or now we're going to speak about another type of dividing of a room, and that is miklape hakoidos, let's use the words of mezanin. In other words, the room is very tall, and you put a barrier. The barrier is not standing vertically. The barrier is laying down. So let's say the room is 13 feet. So after you hit 8 feet, you made like a new floor. Now there is tumah in the house. So the din will be kelim shebeina mechitzo beina kois shebeina mechitzo kois tohirim. Here, guys, we're going to say that this type of mechitza will save. Why will it save? Because the exit of the house is in the same part where the tumah is. Oh, soif tumah latzes. Why would someone ever bring the tumah to that which is over those curtains? They won't. So the tumah doesn't go through there. But in the other direction, or we're speaking about a case where the door through which you enter, you can exit the house, is in the lower part and the part to the right. So if the tumah is to the left, if the tumah is up there, everything is tummy. As we learned concerning an oil, this concept of soif tumah latzes. And as we said so many times, that oil is only matzel in one direction. But if the tumah is under the smaller oil, since the only way to take it out, and eventually you will be taking it out, is through the larger room, it's as if it's already now in the larger room. So far, so good. Really, this is a recap of what we have been learning. And now, like we mentioned in the intro, now that Rambam is introducing something new that we never learned about. Now, if you have kalim that are in the thickness of the wall, regardless which side, in which one of these rooms is the tumah. So now we have to say like this. If you remember, guys, remember the din of a kaved all the way in the beginning. Kaved means, ironically, normally oil stops the tumah from going higher. But whenever you build a structure that's closed around a grave, which is really how we will view the wall over here. If you have a source of tumah, if the kalim are in a place where there's a tefach by tefach, Gewaldik, then we say Tameim. Then the Kalim are Tamei. The Tumah will go in there. The Imlav, I take back the Kaven, not yet Kaven. No, it's the Tumah's in the house. The Kali is in the wall. If there is a space within the wall, it's a chash of a place, we say that the Tumah goes in there. The Imlav to hide him. Now, kfar biyarnu, that what? Ketzad in abayis and chalakoi, leklape artzoi. This is something that we learned in Perek Chaf. It's all about, guys, where the door is. No, it's if there is a door above the mechitza. If there is a door above the mechitza, then the kalim that are stuck within will not become tamei. Over here, all of the halachas that we have been learning until now is that you built a mechitza, but there's only one place for it to exit, and this is why it's affecting these halachas. That even if something is within the wall, if it's not balua in the wall, meaning there is a tefach by tefach space within the wall, then they become tamei. Okay, now bayis shumali teven. If you have a house and you fill it up with straw, and you fill it up, meaning it's all the way to the top, there isn't any current oil in the house. But let me add something. When you open up the door, right, keneged haPesach, you have an area more than a tefach. That's where you enter, you take out the straw, you put in the straw. And if there is tumah inside the straw, whether it's mamish in the straw, or it's between the straw and the roof and the ceiling. So kol hakelim shekeneged yitzias hatuma, any keli that's in the, like we said, by the door proper, there's a opened area. Any kelim that are keneged Pesach, the Malay Pesach, are tameim. Why? Because soif tuma latzes. However, if hoisa tuma chutz lateven b'Malay Pesach, if the tuma was outside the straw in this open area, which is the only place that's still called an oil, because there's a tefach by a tefach space, and you put kalim inside the straw. So here again, im yesh b'mekoymam tefach al tefach al rum tefach. Now they are protected. Why are they protected? Because we view this as an oil b'fnei atzmai. An oil is matzel. Oil b'toich oil is matzel. But if it doesn't have a tefach b'tefach, so then it's not an oil b'fnei atzmai. It's considered also still to be part of the house, and therefore it becomes tamei. Okay. All of this is because the straw that was stuffed in did not allow in the straw area any vacuum. But if there is a poseach tefach between the straw and the ceiling, then we say benkach u benkach, whether there is a place by the entry of a poseach tefach or not, regardless, everything becomes tummy. Because in our scenario, we say she'ein hateven chaytzetz. That's the whole point, that oil, b'toich oil, is only matzel when you don't plan to remove it. Here, you have an oil. And this is within the oil, ain't tumali kanes. But the fact that you plan to remove the straw diminishes its power to save. Halacha Dalet. Koisel shebein shnei batim. You have a wall between two houses, and tuma is within the wall. So like this. And this is not like we had on halacha beis that there's a poseach tefach inside the wall. No, there's not. So something is stuck in the wall. Now listen to this concept. We say that only the room or the house that's closer to the tuma itself becomes tamei, and v'hakorev litara is tahar. It's a great concept. Now, you can argue soif tuma latzes. I know that, but you can only take it out of one of them. The closer one is the one that's considered connected to the place of the tuma. Now, if the tuma in the wall is equally distant from both rooms, so then the din is they both become tamei, and there's a logic for that the Rambam will explain. It's not stam like a suffix. There's a reason for that. I'll just say that by heart, because the emes is the tuma is de facto closer to one of the two rooms. We don't have the ability to be mitzamtzem exactly. So since one of these rooms are vaday tamei, you don't know which one. They're both tamei.
Wait, what if you design one? What if you assign one where you're going to take the tuma out from? Then
I don't know. That's a good question, because we had that concept before.
Right.
The only difference is, Kevin, is when we learned before that your machshava directs the tumah. That is the example there is that you had many doors. So before you made a designation, they're all tamei. Once you decided through which one, you limited the tumah. Here there are no doors. The tumah is stuck in the wall. Might be different here. Now, now in the opposite direction. The tumah is in one of the two rooms, excuse me, and you have kalim inside the wall. And not like halacha beis, where there's a hole in the wall that is keilu its own room. No. It's mamash, it's like buried in the wall. So like this. Mechetzioi ulaklape tuma temeyim. Same thing in the other direction. Does the tumah of the house go into the wall? In other words, I'll tell you more, Kevin. So it's not about the tumah going out. It's not about the tumah going out. It's about the wall is considered part of the room. So take the thickness of the wall. Half of it, the half that's closer to the room to the right, is part of the room to the right. Half of the wall that's closer to the left, that part is considered the room to the left. So if the tumah is in either one of the rooms, and there are kalim in the wall, look to which half are the kalim. And if mechza la, again, if it's in the middle, same logic, just the opposite direction. Again, we say that it's tameim. We're being consistent. And the same concept, notes we're introducing that inside of a wall is considered part of the room. That's the word. So if you have a ceiling right between the house and the upper story, that's solid ceiling, and you have a tumah inside the ceiling, so the same concept. It's not considered above the oil for it to be protected. It's in it. So mechetzya ulamata, if it's in the lower half, habayis tamei valiyah tohira. If the tumah is in the higher half of inside of the ceiling, towards the higher floor, then everything in the aliyah is tamei, the bayis is taught. And if it's in the middle, then we say they're both tamei. And now again, what happens if the issue is not where the tumah is? The tumah is in either the house or in the second story. And you have someone who inserted kalim inside the ceiling. Same thing. Mechetzya v'klape tumah tameim. Mechetzya l'kape toida toiden. Mechza l'mechza tameim. And all of the tameim, again, is the Rambam will explain it soon, is because really the kalim are closer either to the top or to the bottom. We don't know how to make such a precise measurement. But since it is either here or there, and if it's closer to the Tumat Stamei, so we have a doubt in Mitzias, we're going to be Maham. What's going to happen if you have a ceiling that is not under a second story? No, there's only one story. And there's Tuma inside that ceiling, and above it, you're going to the airspace. Same thing. We consider the inner ceiling, the bulk of the ceiling, the gush of the ceiling to be part, the lower half, part of the lower floor, habayis stomach. And therefore, because of the rule that what? Since Tuma goes into the house, if Tuma goes into the house, then the ceiling of the house stops it from going up. It protects the Tuma from going down a bayis tahar. And now that it's considered to be on the roof, if it's on the roof, so what's the halach? What's the halach if there's a source of Tuma laying on the street? If you go directly above it, you become Tamei. And if it's in the middle, so we say in both directions. The bias is Tamei. Maybe it's tackle closer to the house underneath it. And also the ha'emed milmaila keneged atumas tamei. And in all of these cases, why are we machmer sheharei I efshel something? That's an expression that's used that sometimes you have a suffix in halacha. And many times when you have a suffix la halacha, you have the place to be lenient. Sometimes like suffix tuma b'reshus harabim sfeika is taught. Here, it's not a suffix in halacha. Once we establish that the inside of the wall or the inside of a ceiling, you divide it into half. Now it's about calculating, is it in the half closer or further? It is closer or further. We don't know how to make that calculation. Halacheh. Now, what are we talking about? So we have a wall, any wall that's built above the ground to support the roof on top of it, that's called a wall that's serving the house. Okay? Any wall that's serving the house, now we're going to see later a house that's serving the wall. Let me just say it by heart right now. Like, what does it mean, a house serving a wall? Imagine that you go into the ground, and you carve out two openings, like two basements. And the wall that's separating is not a wall that you have to put up. You just leave the earth as it was naturally. That's a different type of wall. But that's not a wall that you built. The two cavities, right, are almost like supporting the wall. Here we're speaking about a normal wall. You build a house, you want to build a wall, you want to put a roof, you build a wall to support the roof. So Yidain Mechza, the status of the house, whether it's Tamei or Tard, will depend, right, on the half of the wall in which the Tumah is. Now, Koitzel Shehula Aver, If there is a wall, there's nothing above it. Vigag habayis samach l'kaisel. Now the roof is being supported by the wall, but it's not above it. This is important. So let's say the guys that the roof goes into the wall and it doesn't rest above it. We'll see why in a moment. This nuance is needed over here. In other words, the top of the wall is facing the heavens. It's supporting, the side of it is supporting the roof. The Eino Murkav ala Koisel, as we just explained. It's important that in our case, the head of the wall is beyond the roof. In other words, the roof is not covering it, it's not stopping it. If you have the stuma, all of these cases, other than an halacha base, is that the tuma that's in the wall, it's not that there's a little room in the wall. No. It's retzutza in the koisel. So hoisa mechetzioi v'lifnim habayis tamei. Now we're not going to be speaking about a room to the side. Now we're going to be speaking about up. The ha'oimid milmaila, but not milmaila on top of the gag. But if a person is standing on the head of the wall, even though the gag is not going over it, they're tahar. Because why, Dovi? Because since we consider that half of the wall to be part of the house, so it's as if the tumah is in the house. The moment we consider halachically the tumah to be in the house, then the gag stops the tumah from going up. So even though you're standing,
in one case, the wall is part of the foundation. Isn't that the case?
Nachamon.
Isn't the wall part of the foundation supporting?
We don't care about the foundation.
The wall is the foundation.
The wall is a wall. I just explained. We're going to get back to it again. This whole idea of having a koisel that's mishamish, the bias, that's going to be in contrast to halacha vav. You're going to appreciate this when we come to halacha vav. A normal wall. The chiddush over here is that even though the roof is not on top of the wall, once we consider the tumah in the wall to be in the house, then the gag protects. So even when you stand out, if the tumah in the wall is in the outer half of the wall, and as we have been, it's all consistent. So it's not considered to be inside the house. Habayis start. Now, oibazoi, guys, don't forget there is no roof over the wall. So the ha'oimid milmayla keneged atumah tamei. Why? Because since Sharei like Pashtum Habayis, so where's it going? It's going straight up. If it's a you don't know. So now the Rambam writes something that everyone is challenged in the external inconsistency with this halacha, because based on everything we have been learning until now, the Rambam should have says mechzal mechza. You'll be machmir both ways. The Rambam does not say only in this case. Habayis tamei, but the ha'oimid milmayla tahar. Because the moment you say that pashta hatuma babayis because you're being machmir for that possibility, then it's not the tzutza. If it's not the tzutza, it's keilu you opened up a Pesach, allowing the tumah to leave the wall into the house. And by the way, if you were to make such an opening, then you would not become tameh if you are over the house. Which here you cannot say tameh on both ends. And again, all the commentators are asking, but Sarachi and why? You're not saying the bayis is tameh because vaday it's in the house. It's only because ef shelatzamtze. Okay, but let's leave it. That's what the Rambam passes. Right. Not al mahakoisel libafnim. Now another nuance. The moment you're saying, Dovi, that it depends where the tumah is. So let's say the wall is thick a foot, right? That's called 12 inches. So in which 6 inches? What happens if after the tumah is there, you add or subtract from the wall? It will change the halach. If you remove the inner part of the house, what did you accomplish by that? So now the room of the house is closer to the tumah. Or if you add more wall from the outside, so now it comes out that the tumah, according to the now dimensions of the thickness of the wall, is closer to the house. It affects a change in halacha, habayis tamei, or in the opposite direction. If you remove the outer stones of the wall, or if you add to the inner thickness of the wall, so now you make going now forward, habayis tar, but you don't even have to move the tumah. If you change the mitzias of in which half of the tumah is by adding to the wall, you change this halach. if before it was closer to the house, the things that were there then remained tummy. But going forward, the tumah is no longer in the house. Now, what happens if you place tumah directly on top of a wall? Same type of wall. So then we say, who cares in which half? I mean, if the wall is thick, the moment it's on top of the wall, it's like laying on the ground. It doesn't go down. So then, okay. Now, halacha vav. Now, like we mentioned before, when we spoke about koisel hamashamish abayis, which is what we're familiar with, is you're building a house, you want to separate rooms, you want to put a roof up, you build a wall. You're building a wall. The din of bias mashamish as a koisel is something it's not that difficult to imagine. Just if you have a big mound, mashal of a mound, big mound, and you make a house by carving in to one side, and then you carve into the other side. You did not make the wall. No, the wall is you left the earth, the stones, the way they were lachatchila. That's called the house is being meshamish the wall. That's the case. So now, all of the halachas that we have been learning until now, that if you have a thickness of a wall that has no tefach by tefach, that was the key. That was halacha based. So what status does it have? It's not its own space. It's not its own space. It's either part of this side or that side. But that's only in a koisel amashamish abayis. But abayis amashar koisel. Now we have the din of keklipas hashum. What does that mean? Keitzad. You're digging out 2 burial vaults because that was common. Like where would you have it? That's the way they buried. They went down. They have these caves, subterranean or above the ground, and they would build in the wall. So the koisel that's separating the 2 kuchs, you didn't build that koisel. Point is, I don't care for what purpose you're making that room. The din of a bias hamashamish as a koisel is that the koisel was always there. The bottom actually are giving visibility to the koisel. And like this, let's go in both directions. Same thing we have been learning until now. If the tumah is bottom and the kalim are in the koisel, all I need is the thickness of a garlic peel, which is garnished nitnish, to say it's a different environment. That koisel is a different environment. It's protected from. Or in the other direction. If the tumah was in the koisel, the kelim abatim, you know what the greatness is? We have been learning the last few days, soif tumah lotzes. We don't say this over here. I'll tell you why. Why soif tumah lotzes? Leave the tumah there. That's the ground. It's a wall. Nah, it's not a wall. Koisel means it's a building. What is the status of a koisel? It's part of the adjacent. It's who's bottled to whom. The moment the koisel is bottled to the bias, it makes so much sense. So then the status of the koisel is the status of the bias. But the moment you didn't build the koisel, fakir, the bias is almost bottled to the koisel. The koisel is definitely not bottled to the bias. All you need is a division. The koisel asela, then all you need is a klipas hashum. Halacha zayin. Koisel shachatzi of your binyan v'chetz yosela. Now, when do we say that a koisel is a standalone area? That's only if all of it was natural. If some of it means you added to it, the moment you added to it, you ruined it. Now you made this koisel serving the bias. So we go by this halacha, the thickness of the wall belongs, depends which half. Halacha ches, the final halacha. Tuma shehoisa ben koides habayis. Up until now, when we have been speaking, Yaakov, either tuma in a wall, or when we have been speaking about bias and aliyah, and the Rambam was speaking about tumah that's in the ceiling. So let me now divide the ceiling into 2 parts. You have the actual beams. That's not the ceiling. That's called koiros. Like now, and then they would put under the beams. Today you would put plaster or drywall, or you would put above it a floor. Up until now, we have been speaking about the tumah in the plaster, in the floor. Now the Rambam is speaking about if the tumah is in the beams themselves. Tumah shreisa bein koiras habayis. Afilu ein tachtela klibas hashum. Here we don't say what we said until now. Well, in which half is it? Habayis tahor. And v'royin es hatuma ki ilahira tzutza ba'aretz. And therefore, what's going to be the din? Only kenegdo will be tamei. However, when do we say that only? If the tumah that's in the beams is mamish swallowed in the beams. There is no tefach al tefach by tefach in the beam. But the in yesh becoming tefach al tefach. Hakol tamei. What's that hakol tamei? I'll tell you very simple. Now, and that's the din of kever sasum. That was the thing that goes. That's a different rule. When someone is buried, like now in the Holy Land, and they build on top of the kever, they build something that almost looks like someone is buried in it. No one is buried in there. They put a marble and a marble and a marble and a marble, but in there's a pesach tefach. Since it's sasum, so normally you say if tumah is in a house, if there's a pesach tefach, the tumah doesn't go up. Here, the opposite. Once it's a fixed structure that has a tefach by tefach on a kever, it becomes tamei. If you touch the sides, you become tamei. So we're going to look at the beam like a kever sasum. And then the final halacha, even if the tumah is within the beam, if you can see it, the bias becomes tamei. He's giving an example. He writes in the bottom something that was very rare. They would use glass. Today, glass is a lot cheaper than it was then. So if you have tumah inside the ceiling, but underneath it is not plaster, it's just glass. Interesting halacha. The fact that you can see it brings the tumah to that environment. Shnei psachim zel gav zeh. Like we mentioned in the beginning of this chapter, this idea of soif tumah lotzis is very significant. So think about the following. You have a tall room, and as we mentioned before, one of the dinim we learned about in the beginning of this perek is that you built a mezzanine, even if it was not that permanent, right? So you put curtains not vertically to separate one side to the other, which is you put it horizontally. But you know what happened? You have a room that no matter in which half you are at, there is a way to exit, which changes everything. So the whole idea of soif tumah lotzis is irrelevant anymore, because you can leave from the top half from a window that you made in the top half, and you can leave from the floor from a door. Shnei psachim zal gav zeh, and now the tumah bekoisel shebenayim, and now there's tumah in between it. Im nireis kishihi letoich achas mehem. Here is also a time where you're going to give visibility, a halachic power. Knows if one of the two environments are able to see through this divider and see the tumah, they are tamei and automatically v'chavei tahor. And the imlav, we go back to the rule: nit doinen mechza la mechza, nit doinen a mechza al mechza. And same concept. If it's the lower half, it's connected to the lower room. If it's in the top half, it's connected to the top room. And as we had before, no, it's not about soif tumah lotzis. You can leave, it's 2 stories. So the bottom line is that the thickness of the wall and the thickness, not of the beam part of the divider between room and, but any other part, we say that half of it belongs to the lower story, half of it belongs to the upper story. Now we are continuing to learn the final chapter in Tumas Meis, Perek Chafei. We're going to learn more details about tumah that's inside a structure. Now we'll have examples of tumah being inside a beam. It's going to be similar concepts, like how do we view that location. We're going to learn a unique din of a part the sake, as we'll explain, and then we'll have at the end of the chapter various halachas benegea to a woman who, God forbid, had a miscarriage. She began having it in one room. She continued to have it in the other room. When do we say this is going to go back a little bit from the shloisha nitzal, and one of them is balua? That means that if a woman, God forbid, has a child that passed away inside of her, it's not going to impart any tumah as long as it is in her. So there's certain chazakas, right? When a woman gives birth, at what point does it impart tumah? Is it not considered balua? And if a woman moved around from one room to the other, sometimes we can determine by the very fact she was able to walk from here to there as araya that the tumah did not yet begin to leave halachically. Chaver Pedek, Chamisha Asar has 12 halachas, beginning with halacha al. Amud ha'omed b'toich habayis. You have a pillar, common, many structures, and the tumah is inside of it. Or the tumah retzutza tachta, the tumah is underneath it. Very good. So the din is that it doesn't go out to the sides. Tumah by kasv oila by kasv yeredis, which is amazing. Doesn't go into the room. It's under the pillar. But if you stand directly above it, it's going to get you. Now, more than that, you know what you can say? Okay, when do you say that the tumah only goes up because the pillar is only going up? In many fancy pillars, for aesthetic reasons, when you are inside the room, before the pillar touches the ceiling, they build a nice decor around the pillar. It's called a perach. So then there will be a havamina. It's ki'ilu, the pillar goes out. They can build over here a nice thing. This is even. Even if there's a perach, let's see if Karen can find a picture. And therefore, you would argue that what? That maybe the perach is now like an oil. It's like ki'ilu, the amudustame, and this is the oil. The kelim are under the perach, the kelim are tohoidim. Doesn't change the status. If the tumah is directly under the pillar, it goes through it and up. If the pillar is a solid, as we keep on learning, what happens? Now we consider the pillar a kever sasu. That's the whole point. It's like the moment you have a structure over a mace or enough of a mace that gives of tumas oil, a structure that has a tefach by tefach, burum tefach, so the whole pillar, now what's the name of a kever sasim? A kever sasim is matama also from the sides. And then the sides are under the roof. The moment misvivav means not only from the top, also from the tzaddim. Crazy. In a house, if there's a mace in this house, you touch the outside wall, you're taught. The only place where the tumah goes out is through the doorway. But when there's no doorway, we also learned that a bias that has no doorways becomes like a kever sasim. So now the bias is tummy because shahadei ala kever. Even not only mitzvahim, no, the pillar is a kever. So the roof on top of the pillar is a oil on top of the kever. Halacha yimel. Too much with the so therefore, we just said it becomes a kever sasum. Now, what happens if you have a multi-story building? So we went from a pillar to a wall. Doesn't matter. I was speaking about a wall that goes all the way up. Even if there are 10 stories, the ganze wall is considered a kever sasum, and therefore, every ceiling that's adjacent to that wall is an oil on top of the tumah. Tameyos. So one second. That is when you have, think of an apartment building. So it's nebuch, it's a crazy thing. Because if you have an apartment building, just think about it. It's not only if the tumah is in the wall, if the tumah is under the wall, but if in any part of it, the inner part of the wall, there's a tefach al tefach, barum tefach, the whole band can have an 80-story building, the whole thing is an oil on a kever. But what happens if, we got it. There is tumah under such a wall. The wall has a din of a kever sasu. But now you go ahead and you build a bias on the other side. Now, guys, that bias on the other, he's just trying to show you that will come a point in this structure where the oil will not be on top of this wall. It will be on top of a structure that's on top of this wall. But a bias on top of a kever stops the tumah from going up. So listen, bana bias misara kois mikan, ubayis mikan, ubana aliyah al gabi shnei abatim. At shenimtza roish hakois latamei, hu be'emtza karko aliyah. In other words, the ukoisel that has a problem now is in the middle of a structure because you built a house here. This wall ends over here. Second story has a roof that's resting on the walls from the outer sides, not on the wall that's a kever. So that's a floor that's over the kever. So the aliyah, this first one, is still considered an aliyah that's built on top of a kever, which is tummy. But what happens if you built one story above it? So now you are on a story that's above a house, above a kever, completely tahira. V'aliyah shniya, which I'll call the third story, habenuya al gaba tahira, mepnei shehein zu al gav zu ve'ein hakois latame kasla. No, the problem is only the wall. Even though you're going to build one story above the wall, the story that's resting on the wall is also tamei. But anything above it, as long as the wall that became a kever is not going to there, you're going to be okay. Halacha Dalet. The Rambam is speaking about a certain way of building that was common in the times of Chazal, the din of a pardes. Now, Mishnah. Choyr gadol sheba'ovi yaksolim shederech b'nei adam lasoisi l'tashmish, that they would call a pardes. Oh, the walls b'chal were thick. They didn't have the technology that way. If you want to build a tall building, the taller the building, then the wider the wall. And in the wall, like Lahavdil in the Holy Beis Hamikdash time, they had all these tugs, remember? Amazing structures and 3 stories of them. So they would build pashut rooms inside the walls. Now, if there's tuma monachas b'toichai, the yesh olav dalsoi segurais. Now, what does it say over here? The Rambam, with the words that I have, I don't know about you, it says habayis tahar. It cannot be that. The Kesef Mishnah writes over here, it's a mistake in the Girsa. Why? Even though the doors are closed, just go back to the basic rules. If you have an inner room and an outer room, if the only way to get from the inner room to outside is going through the outer room, even when the wall is closed, because of the klal, soif tumalot says, it's now in the outer room. You know, it's trapped. The room in the house has no windows. There is no exits to the other side. The pashut, you only get out from the wall through the room to the outside. Even though the wall is closed, the house is tamei. Now, if there's tuma under the ground of such a wall or in its walls, not in the opening space or in its roof, so then royin es kol hachoir ki'iluhu atum and v'royin makim hatuma, and we're going to go back to the principle we learned today in Perek Chav Daled. Oh, it's inside a wall, not tefach al tefach. Stam the inside space of the block of the wall. So as we learned in Perek Chav Daled, halacha shnei pardaskin. One is inside of the other, all in the wall, one on top of the other. Oh, and v'niftach. Here's the beauty. Why chavei tor? Because now the door that's closed, the chavei is matzah. The only time a door doesn't close is when you say soif tuma lotzes. But you never say soif tuma likanis. Why would someone bring the tuma from one room to the other room? You don't have to. Both of them open up to the bigger house. Here again, since the tuma itself is not in this pardes, we discount the pardes. We make it into the din of a kaisel that we learned in the previous chapter. And now the other mechza, how great is halacha vo? Kizais min amaze that someone attached, whatever, on the doorstep. Now, guys, what's important is that the doorstep that's under the lintel is problematic. It's on the part of the doorstep that's outside the mashkoif. It's not under anything, but it's on the doorstep. We say abayis tor. We don't say, it's the doorstep. And since the doorstep is part of the house, it's ki'ilu, it's in the house, and now under the oil. If it's inside the doorstep, how do we view that? Yidin mechzel mechzel. Mamash as if it's in the wall. Hoisa mudbak lamashkoif. But if it's attached to the lintel, then we say the lintel is the top. That's already matama the house. Habayis tamei halacha zay. Now, one of the din of balua, if you remember, is that if if an animal ate kazayis mipsar hames, a couple of dinim, just a chazer, right? If it goes through its digestive tract, when it goes out, it doesn't have a din of kazayis hames. If it's in the animal, then animals take 24 hours to digest. A kelev takes 72 hours to digest. And then the question will be, like, with, let's say, a kelp, within the 72 hours, the din of bulua is only when it's in something that's alive. If the kelp dies within 72 hours, that's the din we have been learning. Ooh, so now the tumah is there, and it's not being protected by the body of the kelp. Kelp she'achal b'sar hameis, and the dog died within 3 days. And now it's laying on the doorstep. So royin halal hatuma migufain. Let's look. Don't measure the dog from its face, from its nose until its tail. What we cheshbon is the halal, the inner opening of his body. If that is keneged hamashke v'lefnim habayis tamei umi keneged hamashke v'lochutz habayis tahar, which is quite it means we completely discount the dog. If we were to measure the dog, it's shayach that the upper, guys, just to know, the halal guf is under the diaphragm. When I say under, I mean because we stand straight. By an animal, it's on the side to side. We don't say that since part of the dog is under the mashkik, the tumah is in there. No. The dog doesn't exist. Where is the halal aguf? Halacha ches. Ha'isha shemeis, God forbid, ubaram atech mayeh. So here also, guys, even though that an uber, we already said from day 41 is mamish like a guf shalom, yeah, but the din of beluim marmatz. As long as this non-living fetus is in the woman's body, it does not impart tumah at all. Not to the woman, not to anyone. So now, let's go like this. If the head reaches a certain size, right? There's a weaving needle, and that's the size we're going to just refer to. So the din is, if the woman's womb opened up enough for one who's outside to be able to see the head, if the head reached that size, now we say it's as if the fetus left her body. So not shot, leaving her body is the way das balabatim. No. It's that. If the rechem, right, when a woman gives birth, so they give you where the husband says, so number 8, number this, where the Wuhalman, right? So the rechem opens up how much for you to be able to see the head. Nitma by something over. Even though none of it left. That's step number 1. It's not called balua anymore. Now, halacha 9. And during her labor, she went from one environment to the other. Turned out that the Rahman al-Islam, she gave birth to a non-living child. That happened in the Bayis Sheni. Now that we said that the din of Beluim is only before her womb opened up to that point. In middle of labor, she went from one room to the other. So maybe let's say that even though she actually gave birth by Bayis Sheni, but maybe her rechem opened up by Bayis Rishon enough for now that we know the non-living baby, maybe it was matama the Bayis Rishon. Says we don't say Hari Bayis Rishon Tomei Misafik because Shema Kishahoisa Boy Yotza Roisher Shenefalza. As we described, that we have that chashash only if that nefel was very early on in its development. But if Hegel Roish Hanefel Kipika, if it became that big, we're not speaking about a crown, we're speaking about the size, then we say Abayis Rishon Tahar. Because if a woman's womb would have been that amount opened, she would not be able to walk. The fact that if she walked on her own. Now, therefore, that's only a siman if she walked on her own. But in Hoysen, he tells us Bagapayim, if people supported her, now not that people carried her, even if no one carried her, but you had 2 people, hopping onto her shoulders, then she could have walked. Then the Bayis Rishon is not, it's not a Tumah Bad, it's a Tumah Safik. Because with help, a woman could walk. A woman who discharged a placenta, remember that rule? And we learned in Chazal the whole time, En Shilya B'loi Vlad. So then Habayis Tomei Vadai, not Safik, because Chazaku, She'en Shilya B'loi Vlad. Why don't you see the Vlad? We say that the Vlad is, so to say, dissolved in the placenta. Halacha Yudal. Mi Sheyol Shnei Yeladim. And Echad Chai ve'Echad Meis. Im HaMeis Yotzer Rishon. We say the living child is tahar, even though in the womb they had contact. The base hasasarim doesn't count. Did they have contact when they were born? If the one that's not living came out first, we say the living one stayed in. The living one had koyach to wait for that one to be expelled first. But in the opposite direction, if the living child came out first, since the second one, Nebuch, was not living, so it flowed near the first one, halachically. It couldn't hold itself back. It didn't have its own koyach. So therefore, there was an egia once the first one left. There was an egia once the second one was, while the second one was already born, like we said before, when the woman was.
You're in something, a room or whatever.
She gave birth not under a roof. The only contact could have been the contact. Very good. No, it's practically if they're under the same oil, who cares?
Right.
But if she gave birth outdoors.
So even if you didn't see the touch, you assume there wasn't.
There was a touch. Now it's not only the touch was not only when the living one was in the world. The touch must have been when the non-living one was halachically in the world. Now the beauty, now you get it. When people, if you didn't learn the previous halachas, you can say, but I can see that I'm already established that once the womb is open to a certain point, it's considered born. It's considered ba'olam. There was a touch then. The second one that's not alive, it does not hold itself back. It doesn't have its own movement. So the moment the first one is exiting, so there's more space, it like rolls after it. Because and final halacha yud beis, final halacha in tumas meis, for isha sheyolda v'lad meis. Afil an eifel cotton kameshu b'yarno harehi tamei tumas shiva. Now, guys, don't jump. Whenever we learn, right in Parshas Tazria, that a woman is tamei as a yoledes, I know that. Whether it's a week, after a zachar, or 2 weeks, that's not tumas meis. For that, she does not need to have the afar of the paraduma. We're not speaking about the fact, the numbers. No, if she gives birth to a miscarriage, to a stillborn, we say that when the non-living fetus was in her magas base, hasasarim was not matamar. But again, it's already considered yotzala avera oilam, not when it mamish fully emerges. So therefore, at that point, it touched her. So she also was tamei mitzad tumas meis, which means she'll need the afar para on the 3rd day and on the 7th day. It's very important. Okay. Now, prior to birth, if a midwife put her hands, the hands of the midwife, inside of her womb to help remove the body, the chai is tamei yeshiva. And the woman is still tahira. She'll only become tameya when the baby is born. Just because a chaya was able to put her hands inside this woman's womb, it doesn't give it the status of yatzala aver ha'olam.
It's open.
That's not open enough. Just because a chaya was able, maybe it's too deep in there. Interesting. Now, the tumas chaya is only midivreyim. Because, like Yaakov was asking, hold on, if the baby is that much inner, it should not be matama the chaya. It's only midrabanan. Gezeira shema tigabay misheitzel proizdor. Avol min atoira ein maga beis as a sort of maga at all. Hoyel v'hu b'toy chamei ayim hanegeh b'toy. And v'chein habolei atabas tameya v'chazar ubala achrei atabas tohira. Afa pisha noguzu b'zu inside the meyav ein maga. V'hatameya b'tumasa v'hatahoyra b'tarasa. V'hatameya b'tumasa mishaimim b'toy v'hatahara b'taharasa. And saliko lohu hilchas tumas meis b'siyata d'shmaya. I want to say one pashut word that after learning how easy tuma spreads, all of this is really a kol shchen and a kal v'chomer, how much tahara spreads and how much kedusha spreads. If you take all of the dinim and you revert it in the opposite direction, you think, how can I affect someone else? If they're in an adjacent room and there's the wall in between, but if there's a lush in the wall, it's going to spread. That's the bottom line message from all of this. We are starting Hilchas Paraduma. Hilchas Paraduma, the Rambam writes in the header, Yesh b'chlol and shtei mitzvahs hasei v'zeu pratim, the din of a Paraduma, and number 2, then tumas meinida and utaharasan. So first of all, when you take the ashes and you put it into waters, at times we call those waters meinida, and you have this paradoxical power to the waters that, of course, we know that it's metired, the one who's tamei, and as the Rambam will make it clear, not always, not always. Sometimes those same waters sometimes can be metame, the one that has contact with it, as we'll explain. Uber mitzvahs elu b'prakamelu pede krishen has 15 halachas. And let me just go back in a moment when we learned karbanos, when we learned about the different names. Remember, there's a keves and there's an ayol. You have the same animal, but a male lamb, a male ram ages. Keves and an ayol, we learned it's 1 year as a keves, and once it goes into the second year, it's called an ayol. Even though, just to remember the pilgas, that no animal is allowed to be offered as a carbon in its 13th month. But just the words, so some animals change their name as the years go on. Now, guys, there is an egel egla. Egel egla is only in its first year. But then there's something called eglas bakar. Eglas bakar is in the second year. An animal is only called a para or a para in its third year. For how long is it called a para and a para? For 2 years. After that, it's called an old animal. The mitzvah is to shecht a para aduma. So we're going to see first the age. And we're going to learn about the age. We're going to learn about the redness. We're going to learn about how much do we tolerate not redness. We're going to learn the halachas that the animal cannot work. We're going to define what does work mean. If it's letzarcha, if it's shaloi letzarcha, and the ikid with many consequences, going back a little bit to karbanos, even though the paraduma is slaughtered and the Torah calls it achatos, the paraduma does not have a status of kache mizbeach. The paraduma has a status of kache berek habayis. And the big nafkamina between the two is if something is mugdash lemizbeach, if it's not blemished, it cannot be redeemed. Something only has kedushas berek habayis, you can redeem it. And as we'll see, you could redeem a paraduma. Okay, Chavepede Krishan 15 halachas halacha aleph. Mitzvahs paraduma shetia bas sholei shonami bas arba. So, like we mentioned, in its first year, it's called an egel. In its second year, doesn't go me egel. It's like a vestachaboigeres. You don't go me katnus le bagrus. There's another. So there's an egel, egla, first year. Second year, it's called eglas bakar. Only when it's in its third year. And then in its fourth year, not when it turns 3, just to get that. Okay? Not the way we count numbers by years, because when a person is born, today we celebrate by a human being when you only turn 1 year old. Your first birthday. No. The first year is Egel. In its second year, Eglas Bakar. In the third and fourth year, that's when the Torah calls this a para or a para. After that, it's called an old animal. The Rambam is going to pass in Lakula that you could use an old animal. Oh, 1 second. So the im says zakena b'diavad it's kshera, but you try not to wait until the animal reaches that age. Because it's so easy for this animal to become invalidated. Some of it is if it went to work. Now that is something that you have more ability to control. Make sure no one works with it. But whether its color changes, it's completely beyond your control. Shema tashkir. It's amazing. By uns, the older you get, the whiter you get. By the paraduma, you get old, you become schwarz, you get dark. And then, v'tipasel. Now, the Rambam is writing a gavaldic point. Whenever and we found the paraduma, the Beis Hamikdash was not allowed to buy it only up until when it becomes a para. So, ve'ein loichin egla, even though it's something so rare that you want to chaparain and raise it, the Beis Hamikdash does not do that because the Torah writes ve'ikvei lecha para. Not an egla, not an eglas bakar. You can only buy it when it's enough. Lo egla. Now what happens if loimatzu ela egla, and we're concerned? Be practical. How do I know that? Now I know the owners, they can sell it to the man in kedushin over there. They can charge a tremendous amount of money, but still the Beis Hamikdash wants to be secure. So what you do is just to secure it, you make a price with the owners. So Ke'ilu, you feel safe that it will be yours. But it remains under the guardianship, it remains all under its original owners until it reaches the age of it entered its third year. From where do you spend the money? from Trumas Alishka. In other words, as we'll see in a moment, on Mitzad Echad, it's Kache Berek Habayis. The Trumas Alishka, which comes from the half of Shkolim, that goes for Kache Mizbeach. So it's a hybrid. The Torah calls it Achatas. The money comes from that kasa. Halacha Beis, Tamima. Tamima only means complete, perfectly read, and not perfectly developed, meaning that there's some genetic flaw that can make people, habal animals, into dwarfs. Sometimes you can say it's not a tamima. It could be. Loi tamimas koima. Therefore, even if it was a nanasa, even if it was by nature, in other words, all animals that age has that height, it's half the size, doesn't matter. Sheda, and by the way, that fits the rules of other kach. Because when we learned about all of the, remember that many psulim of mooms, we never learned the moom of being a dwarf. If at the same place, you have two white hairs, or in the same place, you have two black hairs, what's shot in the same place? Either these two are coming out of one follicle, or they're coming out of neighboring follicles. The point is, guys, that's the people don't know that. They know about the two. One is good. Yeah, two is not good if it's together. If you have one here and one there, it's not a problem. But the haim, either munachos or meichichos zualzu, they're mamish touching each other. That is where you say that even two passes in. What happens if it's born to the base? How would it be born to the base Hamikdash?
If they own it, they own an animal, and then
that's a good question. I don't know. In other words, is there an obligation? The fact that we learned that you cannot buy it as an egel, so do you have to buy it? I don't know. Right. If there were two hairs, one next to the other, and the ikaron madim, but the tip of the hair is mashchir, or in the other direction, ikaron mashchir v'roishin ma'adim. So the Rambam writes two things. Number one is you follow the ikir. What a beautiful cloud. Sure. But so that means if the ikir is red, you're good. But 1 second, you're not good yet. If the ikir, if the root is red, you have to cut off the black. But you are allowed to do that, and you resolve it. If you have two hairs that are white, you pull them out, you didn't accomplish anything. It's fake. Here you follow the ikir. But the goizes, the misparayim, esreishan amashir. You're not allowed to share kachin. The einoi choishish mishum giza ba kachin, because she ain't kavanasi logois. All you want to do is you want to remove the black part of it, the white part of it. Now, implicit in the Rambam is prior to you cutting off that part that doesn't have the red color, it's not kosher. It's psula and a chanami. But as long as the ikir is red, you are allowed to do it. Halacha dalit. When you cut it off, just to know, when you cut it off, you have to leave. Don't cut it all the way down to the skin. You want all of the hair to be there. And hair being there means enough length of a hair that you can cut it off with a scissor, because when you cut a hair very close to the skin, sometimes there isn't enough for you to cut off anything more. Shekol sa'ara she'emen, they tell us bazug, harehi ki'ilu einom, and lefikach, im hoi b'shtei sa'aris levanis eishchayres. Why do we have to know this klal? And if they only began to grow, but they're so short that they're not yet able to be pulled out bazug, so then harizuk sheino, and then chaparayim, do it right away. Halacha hey. Now red, Akami spoke about the hair. What about its horns? What about its hoofs? There, I don't care what color they are. Eloma, guys, yogoid, cut them off. Another detail about cutting them off. Knows you want everything to be reddish. When it comes to the horns, if you remember, you know how the horn is. So there's the nakfus of the horn, right? And then you have the bone of the head, we call it the zachar, that's protruding into the. You can't cut that off. If you cut it off, you make the animal into a balmum. That we learned whenever we learned about the movement. But you can take off the outer part to remove that which does not look red. Galgal ha'ayin, but the galgal ha'ayin, the color of the teeth, the color of the tongue, in place l'maparam. In other words, the color of the karnayim, of the tilfayim are important. Alama, you are allowed to remove it. Halacha va. Hoysa bayabeles. and now you cut it off, and you got yourself a problem. If when you cut off the yabelus, which you have to, because it's a moon, and in its place here grew, if hair grows, even if the hair turns out to be red, it's psula. Because the hair that grows in the place of ayabelas will not be fully red. These are the words. Halacha zayin. Kol hamumen ha-poislim ha-kachim, poislim ha-para, shenemar asher ein ba mum. So for example, if it was a yotze doifer, who it came out of its mother cesarean, or it was either, right, the mechir, it was exchanged for a dog, or if it was the esnan zoina, or if it turns out to be treifa, or if it was used in an act, active or passive, of bestiality, psula. Going back to the klal, kola, poislam es ha-kachim ha-mizbeach, poislam es ha-para. Now there's a big chiddush here. Don't understand from these dinim. It means it has a kedushas mizbeach. It does not. Afalpi shikakache bedek habayis. So why does it have to have the same high standard of tamimus? Because the Torah calls it achatos. So what's the maila of it being only bedek habayis? As we'll see soon, that you can be poida it, as they did many times. Like what happens if you find a nicer putter? We'll get to that soon. Now, umutar likach oisem en agoy. What's the chiddush? You said that if an animal was involved in such an act of reveya nirvatz pasol, ve'ein choishem shema reva hagoyim. Why? Because the guy knows how much we value these animals, how much you can sell it for a fortune. And if people are going to catch him doing that, he's going to lose the sale. It's called mirsis. She'ena mafsed behemtoi. You say the para kachim, even more chamor, that you don't find by kachim isbeach. And that like this. Now we really have two psukim. In Parshas Chukas, the Torah is speaking about the paradum. In the end of Shoiftim, in the Egla Arufa, different din. The Torah also writes that the Egla Arufa cannot have work done to it. But you know what? In Parshas Chukas, all the Torah says is Asher loy Allah Allah oil. That's all the Torah mentions. The Torah doesn't add the words that you can't do any work. But since the Torah does speak about the psul of an oil, and by an Egla Arufa, the Torah mentions both. Sai Asher loy ubad ba. And also, oil. So Chazal learn oil. Ma oil ba'egla is not only an oil. What about not a yoke? Forget about a yoke. A yoke is for plowing. What happens if you use the animal to thresh? Everything. Asher ubadba. Ma oil ba'egla. Also shara ba'diska oil. So Chazal learn af oil. If so, shara is oil. So hold on a second. I have a klotz kasha. If doing work with the egla rufa makes it possible, why did the Torah write oil? Just write, don't do any work. Of course, plowing is one of the words. So the answer is like this. Guys, we learned this in the Gemara. That if I take an animal to the threshing floor, until it actually threshed, it's ksheda. If I put the oil on the animal, even if it didn't yet do the charisha, it already passed it. That's why it's unique. Ella, oil even prior to the avodah. All the other avodas ain't priceless. El b'shas avodah ketzad. Kosher leha oil. Af al pisha lecharish b'psulam. But if ichnis oladush, and in afsalas ache yadush b'vechin chachayotze b'zeh. What's up? To learn avodas Hashem, when we always speak about Kabbalah's oil. That's not Kabbalah's oil. But normally we say the ikid is the ma'isa. Action is king. By Kabbalah's oil, it's not an action. It's an attitude. That the power of Kabbalah's oil. Now, rochav aleha. Even only nishan oleha, even nitla biznava. You're going through a river and you want to chop your balance, so you chop onto the tail. That's a big boo-boo. Look how much money you lost. Kipel oleha, say that he's going menakash alakal. So you have the rope, right? And you're going through a river, and the rope now you don't need. You don't want the rope to get wet. So you're putting the rope on the back. Go nadish, like nothing. Nasan talesa yolav. Nasan alel kshusha. In all of these cases, psulam. Now, what happens if you tie it b'moiseiram? That's not an oil. You know, you want to lead it with the rope, and you're tying the rope to its neck. So if you're doing it to protect it, then it's ksheda. But if you didn't need to do it because it's going to run away, then it's psula. Now, Why even l'shmira is it ksheira? Kol shmira she'eina tzricha. Oh, it's shmira, it's not avoida. But if you didn't need to do it, it's called masayon. It's called a burden. It's a good lesson for the people that are overly guarding things today. So there's a certain amount of shmira that's necessary, and more than that, it's tama masoy. Also, lo sandal shaloi tachalik. No, it's if you the hooves, you have to know how to work animals. You did something to it to make it to give it a better grip. It should not slip. Or you put your talus on it to protect it from flies. That's also not a problem. Sheda. And that's the rule. Anything that you do for it, that's not called avoida. Sheda. If you do anything to the animal for the animal to be able to be in better service for others, that's called work. Sulam. What happens if the animal works on its own? Or oil I don't know how that's possible, but somehow a yoke is placed with automatically. So now the kavana of the owner is essential. If the owner is pleased, then psulam. Guys, remember this, Danny? Ubad, avad, kri, ksiv. What's the word? Ubad is passive. Passive means even though you didn't do it, if it happened. Avad means you did it. How do you reconcile the ubad and the avad? Is that even if it happened by itself, if you have rotzain, you know where you have the same exact kri and ksiv? Remember by yutan, ki yutan maim al kozera hazoirua. Yutan yiten, same kri and ksiv. Passive, active. Even passive with your dots. He gives a great example. A bird rested on it, because you don't care. You're not happy. But if a male mounted the animal, now guys, without your knowledge, now, are you happy when a male mounts your animal? Let me just tell you the catch-22. The Gemara goes into more details. It's a catch-22. We're going to be machmir. Now, you're going to say, if I know, my friends, that a zachar mounting my animal, making it pregnant, or potentially making it pregnant, is going to disqualify it, I won't want it to happen. But listen to this, Danny. If I don't want it to happen, then it won't disqualify the animal. If I don't want it to happen, it won't disqualify. And people want for the animals to get pregnant. They'll have more financial value. So we consider this an act of l'ratzon. You can't say, how is it l'ratzon? It's you could have sold it for $1 million. Okay, so then you didn't want it. If you didn't want it, then you're happy it was mounted. If it doesn't invalidate it, since that side of the catch-22 makes it l'ratzon, psula. The ein tzarich leimer that if it's pregnant, it's automatically psula. Now, remember Rivka, my Mari Chassidus speak about the meaning of Rivka. Rivka means a team of animals. If it joined on its own a team of animals and they were threshing, so it threshed with it, you didn't want any of that. So it remains ksheira. If you brought it into the Rivka because your little parale still needed to nurse, or it happened when it was still young, you don't want the threshing part, but you want it to be amongst the group because you wanted it to have a source of natural milk, of food, and then it went and it threshed. You wanted it to be there. Halacha 8. No, you wanted it to do both. You wanted it to do both. Tinak v'tadash. Halacha 8. Parash anoy l'psul. If there's a psul in it, tipadem. Now, guys, remember again, psul doesn't mean a mum. If it would have had the din of kachem misbeach, I'll give you an example. If it did work, doing work for kachem does not invalidate it. Just because it did work, the paraduma also. If it did work, you can redeem it because it's better kabayis. The chayna mesa. Remember that if an animal is kachem misbeach and it dies, there's no ha'amada v'ha'aracha. You cover. Remember, you can't redeem it. Here you could. Tipada mipnei oida. Now another nuance. There's a rule that any kachim may not be redeemed to feed it to dogs. If an animal dies, nevelas, no one ate nevelas. So when you're saying you're allowed to redeem it, I get it. But for what? For the hide. Halacha 9. Nishchato l'shem chulin chaval But now the fact is you slaughtered it l'shem chulin, no longer valid for a paraduma. Tipada. But they mechaperes. You know something? If you shechted it while it was on the right location on the pyre, and even though after the shechita, before the burning, these are the words, you found a nicer paraduma. Once you began to do the avodah in a kosher way, here we say, even though it's kedusha bedek habayis, it's a bezoyin for you to redeem it. Now, ein lo pidyon oilamos. Halacha yud. Lakchu para. You bought a para. The Beis Hamikdash bought a para, and the matzah acheres lo mimenu. So that's the word. Areizu tipada b'loy mum. Not mum, not puzzle. You can redeem it. Kedusha bedek habayis. Who does the shchit? So it says that Amma Malach Yudalev, Af Kohen Hedyet is allowed to be the one burning the pot. Burning doesn't only mean the burning; it means all of the steps that we'll learn later. The shechting it on the maracha, putting in there whatever has to be put in there, and burning it. Because it says Befedish Umasatim Oisa El Lazar HaKohen. Now Parshas Chukas, we're speaking about the mitzvah. The first paraduma was done while Aaron HaKohen was alive. Now someone might come ahead and say, is that ayah that the Kohen Gadol may not do it? For that, the Rambam says, not only the first paradoma was taken not to be done by the Kohen Gadol. We learn from over there it doesn't need to be done by the Kohen Gadol. But in the future, anyone can do it. Saya Kohen Gadol, Saya Kohen Hedyet. Vadayin Aron Kohen. Mepnei Shmuel Lamdu, Zunases, only Be'elazar. But Ushar, Kol HaParais, Be'emi Kohen Gadol, Be'emi Kohen Hedyet. Now let's go further. Allah Yud Beis. Now that we said that this animal is not Kachem Mizbeach, so therefore, even though the Kohen Gadol wears the Shmoyim Begadim while he does the Avodah, it's like in between. It's not Avodah. Not only because it's not done on the Beis HaMikdash, it doesn't have a din of Kedushas Mizbech, and therefore, if the Kohen Gadol is going to be the one doing the Shechita, he only wears Dalad Begadim, which is very unusual. But Ha'oisa, Loivesh, Arba Kalim Shel Kohen Hedyet, Avada Ben Shasar Kohen Hedyet, even if the Kohen Gadol is doing it. And all of that is because it says, it's all from the Nosatam Oisam El Lazar HaKohen. Oh, you're doing it not as the Kohen Gadol, but it's amazing. The Kohen Gadol does not wear the Shemini Begadim. That's the good trivia. Working out with Kohen Gadol, doing something that can only be done by Kohen, and he doesn't wear the Shemini Begadim. That's the answer.
What about the process of burning it? You have to be done outside the base of the.
That's right.
Now that we're the Begadim outside.
Yes, you are. You have to. Yeah, but here you have to. Here you have to. You're doing the avodah. The only thing you didn't do it, Danny, but where else do you go outside by Yitzhak Sadeshin? The Rambam already wrote it. Not the Truma Sadeshin, the Yitzhak Sadeshin. It was dirty. They had special begadim, also white, but not the big day kahuna. And then you have the Chatois Hanasus Befnim. Like what garments did they wear?
Right.
Okay. Halacha Yudgim. Kol ha'oiskim aparim etchila va'at soif. Even if they are Tivul Yoim, that will be the final topic of today. Now, my friends, like this, let's go back to Chagiga. When a person is coming, whether he only had two masheres, whether I'm only enough, even if I was to May Mace, but today is my seventh day, I had the second sprinkling and I went to the mikvah. I'm now called a Tvul Yom. To eat Meiser Sheni, which a Tamei may not eat, could eat. To eat Truma, that's the milas that we learned over there. To eat Truma, that's of course the first Mishnah Barachas, you have to wait until Heret Shemesh. We know that on one hand, we're so careful for everything to be done b'tara. We know from the Eibishter that a Tvul Yom who went to the mikveh even before Heret Shemesh is tahar enough to do the avodah. The Tzedukim, in their ignorance, they challenge that. And now we're going to see that the ashes of the mechatos is so susceptible to tumah that it can even become tumah in the level of a chadmish. But to show that the tzedukim are wrong, since a tful yoim is kosher enough, they dafke were metame the kohen and the kalim that are going to be used, and they toiveled it. So it's in this time where it's called a tful yoim, and they used it for the savoy. Now tomorrow we're going to begin by learning halachas that they said, since we're lenient here to show that tzedukah are wrong, for people not to take it lightly, they added a lot of other chumras, very strong. That's tomorrow. But first we're going to see like this. That if they were tfula yoim, they already went to the mikvah, but it's not dark, and they cannot eat truma. Similarly, if you're speaking about the ones putting the ashes in the water, or the ones that are going to be sprinkling the ephod of the parah, None of these people can do it while they are tummy, but a full yom is good enough. All that means, that's what we know from the Eibusher. He has to be taught enough to Ma'aser Sheni. If he didn't even go to the mikveh, he's not okay. But it doesn't mean tar for truma. Nevertheless, now halacha yudaled did tzedukim. They said wrongfully, and therefore the Beis Din, the Bayesheni, which is when the whole tzedukim came about, they dafke were mitamim esakara hasoyif esapara b'sheretz, and then taking that person to the mikvah. Not waiting until it gets dark. That they wrongfully paskin that meha al rucham, they came to it on their own and not min kabbalah. Logically, they were right. Who cares? It's not the logic can stand, but the Torah is not logic. The Torah is the Eibishter's Torah. All of them, they have to be taught. They dafke made them tvulei yoim. It's amazing. Now, this could give people the impression that it's not so serious. And as we also learned in other dinim today, it's only kachim mizbeach. So again, Perek Sheni tomorrow will begin by learning big stringencies that the Chachamim plays not to make people think it's lenient. But let's finish the final halacha today. Halacha tezva. Where would they place the afon? So they would make a kelim. One way to make a keli is they would cut the reed off the ground. Now you have a hollow tube, and that would be the base of the keli. Also, yetame oisa, v'yat bilena, and only then they means they dafke made everything. The people, the kelim tame, mikvah, prior to the head of Shemesh, they used it. Another din, ta'un tfilam. All of the people that were involved in the steps, including making the kelim, even if you're not making the keli, now that the Chachamim says you have to be metame the keli, that's also called part of making the keli. You become tummy on a level kitmei meis bashvi shaloi. But guys, just to make it clear, not that you have to have the afar para. You have to have, you are on the seventh day. You have to wait ahead of Shemesh. So even though we're going to learn later that you are a tmei meis bashvi shaloi, these are rabbinic tumas, which means Narvas, then you are tame, meaning you have to go to the mikveh, you have to wait until night. And then you put the ashes in it. God willing to be continued.
So this whole